living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Doody in a Google search for my site. This is a pilot. This is a test. This is Resign Now. It's inspired by the writings of Noam Chomsky. This concept of democratization. He talked about points in history when people, the population was more active than they had been in the past. Literally the 60s and protesting, and including Martin Luther King's leadership of the civil rights movement. This was a time that he called democratization, that the power was shifting to people. Now, that's visible. That's common knowledge of history, and it's easy to understand. People rise up, people get attention, people get power. Social revolution of that time. That was a contrast to the decade before. So what Noam Chomsky articulates very well, that I can't, is then how the reverse process happens, how elite of government and business say this power to the people stuff is not good. I don't want to share. I'm greedy. And even though those goals are not outspoken, there are overt ways that the elite of government and business have counteracted the democratization. So it is my first choice to be reading Noam Chomsky. But I panicked. I didn't get his text. I have something else instead. So my intention of this Resign Now is to create a weekly forum where people can come and call for someone to resign. When I listened to Noam Chomsky talk about history and talked about civil rights movement, talked about social movements, talked about various points in history, the labor movement, where people got noticed, people got attention, people demanded change. It was a relatively huge effort with enormous costs. The labor movement has untold number of deaths related to the very long labor movement that brought change in this country. Would it be the very last decade of the 20th century and the first decade of the 21st century? Doing that right? 20th century, last decade of the 19th century, and first 3 decades of the 20th century. The labor movement added an enormous amount of pain and suffering, and it brought about change. Martin Luther King, civil rights, his death personally was certainly not the only. Demanding for change had untold cost and a huge public effort of a lot of people. So that's where Noam Chomsky's thinking and talking stops and mine begins. It occurred to me in my own thinking, all of these efforts, whether it's labor movement or women's right to vote or emancipation of slavery, emancipation of the slaves, civil rights movement of the 70s, sexual revolution, and hippies of the 60s. These are all efforts of the masses of the elite. Again, the elite of business and government. People in power. This is a trash can, so we're going to have people resign by putting them in the trash can. This is not here intentionally. It's really not my goal to torture anyone. I do want to see people lose their jobs over mishandling of the power that they have. So resign now is this idea that says, wow, Noam, you're right. This is a long history of a fundamental need of the people to get the attention and influence society. And protest is the most common way that that's done, or most visible, most memorable way that that's done. So there we go. Now trigger the thoughts of my thinking, Tom Duty. I think, wait a minute. We seem to get people to resign with relative ease. And I really mean that. In contrast, it'd be so cool if this guy, if I could get this guy on. I'm not even going to try. This is the first one. The idea is that I'm going to solicit people and get them to participate. And I just got a ping from Brad in Great North American Desert near Sky Harbor International. He is certainly he's a great target to participate in something like this. Facebook Live is now becoming fairly popular. I see people do Facebook Live, and I see them in my feed, and like they're over. You know what? Well, okay. I guess I didn't check. Oh, wait a minute, but that was 15 minutes ago, and it's over. So if you want someone to participate in a live program, I think I got to make it longer. So I'm going to attempt to make this an hour long. My computer sits on a bucket, and I have warmer clothing in the bucket. I have this idea that I'll actually be able to do this right into the winter time. Listeners, if you ever done tech computer things out in the cold, you'll know that thinking you can do this and doing it, these devices get cold. The electronics aren't really equipped for the cold, and humans can equip themselves for the cold, but then to interact with electronics, that becomes difficult. So this thing may not be, I may not be able to accomplish this outside, but it's my hope that I can. Again, my thinking is, just like Noam Chomsky says, all this period where people want to get control, influence, those in power, relatively speaking, demanding a resignation comes, it really happens. So here's the mechanism. You got people that are outraged. I think it's John Stumped of Wells Fargo resigned. Now, there are probably many people that had a part with that, including the most visible, by my account, at least the headline worry, is Elizabeth Warren. And they questioned him in the Senate, and she went on a classic Elizabeth Warren attack and didn't do very well defending himself, and in the very near term he resigned. So certainly the public had help from a senator, in this case Senator Elizabeth Warren. And but nonetheless, sometimes it happens. Football coaches will go, university presidents will go. And this happens when you compare it to the massive effort, toil, suffering, murder, death, violence, vandalism of some of our big social movements, revolutionary times. Demanding a resignation is sort of easy. So, in the spirit of Noam Chomsky, democratization, people want to get control, influence the top. Well, I'm trying to create this forum for resign now, and I want to keep it open to call for people to resign. I got this idea on the very first day. There was a call for someone's resignation, and that person resigned, and it was over West Virginia mayor who described Michelle Obama as a and many people, justifiably so, were offended by this. I don't know if Michelle was one of them. I don't think it was public that she even knew about it. That person resigned. And it happened sort of easily. Now, a small town mayor in West Virginia is really not who I had in mind with this program. I want to go higher. I want to get the John Stumps of the world. But again, I'm not, as a host of this program, I'm not going to try to choose the targets. I am just attempting to create the forum. I'm attempting to make I'm attempting to show the discipline needed to hit a weekly time slot and show some endurance. Stand out here in the cold. Put on my warmer clothes if I need to. And fill the time. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to try to return. Okay, so it's 5:16. I'm trying to go till 6 o'clock. So that is my intro. And now I'm going to attempt to read. And I wish I could safely turn the screen off and stick it in my pocket, but I'm afraid to. So this is the kind of thing that I'm trying to do tonight. I'm going to go a little bit, and then I'm going to attempt to do what I'm afraid to do right now. This is a book I just picked off my shelf in a panic. This is Michael Gross. He wrote Rogues Gallery. It's an unofficial biography, the secret stories of lust, lies, greed, betrayals that made the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's an interesting book. I read almost all of it. This is an autographed copy, and I've also met the author. It seems like these two things would probably happen on the same occasion, which is what usually happens at an author's signing. But in this case, Michael Gross had stopped in the bookstore and he had signed the copies that were on the shelf, and I happened to buy it after that. And on another occasion, years later, I met Michael Gross on an MTA train, which was kind of cool. So again, this text is not completely out of whack. This is about sort of, lies, greed, lust. This is misuse of power and wealth. So it's sort of related, but it's certainly not precise like Noam Chomsky. So introduction. Again, I'm gonna check this time, which I have to take my gloves off to do. It's really a pain in the ass. On a chilly winter day early in 2006, I sat in the office of Felipe de Montebello, then director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he announced his retirement 2 years later. Montebello is generally considered, even by his most fervent admirers, a little arrogant. And I've already got a low battery warning. Not that I did not anticipate this. I did anticipate this. I did not anticipate it this soon. And the fact that I could do this in really cold weather at this moment is seeming nearly impossible. Because it feels cold, not cold. That is my laptop battery seems to be holding out. And Italy still has the mic open. My laptop has the mic off. So I think I just recovered. So listeners, this seems like it should be really easy, but I have no assistant. And I want to not need an assistant. I also want to do this outside because that's where protests happen. Testing. My brief conversation with museum administrators, then racing to an abrupt conclusion, had actually begun to fall in 2005 when I called Harold Holzer, vice president for external affairs, and told him of my plans. His reaction was quick and negative. Nobody here is ever of a mind to cooperate with an author, he said. The only kind of books we find even vaguely palatable are those we control. Nonetheless, the museum had just broken precedent to cooperate with another author writing about the museum. It was vaguely palatable because it was controlled entity. Once it was published, I'd seen there was no point in my writing another. If we tell you we won't cooperate, will you go away? This is someone speaking to Michael Gross. Until now, there have been only two kinds of books on the museum. Some that have agendas, whether personal Thomas Hovinger's memoir, Making Mummies Dance, with score-setting romp, John L. Hess, covering moving into journalism in the New York Times, came to hate him and explain why in grand accusations or political. The other kind of book, this is just hard to read. The other kind of book was commissioned, authorized, published, otherwise sanctioned by the museum. The first among those appearing in 2 volumes, 1913 and 1946, was by Wilford E. Howe, the museum's publication editor and in-house historian. They are, to be kind, dutiful. 2 later, somewhat juicier histories were commissioned by Hoving and published to coincide with the museum's 1970 centennial. A coffee table book called The Museum by the late Condé Nast magazine writer Leo Lerman, other merchant masterpieces. A narrative history by Calvin Tompkins, song writer for The New Yorker, through merchants, is an independent view of the museum's history. As Tompkins wrote in his acknowledgement, the book, he used museum-paid researchers and resubmitted the manuscript to the museum officials for comment. Danny Danziger, author of a 2007 book, Museum Behind the Scene, changes force on him early that year at the Viking Press. So rather than mess with my cell phone, I'm going to come here to check the time. That was a total of 10 minutes, torturous 10 minutes. So the idea is, if I am successful and I'm soliciting listeners, I am soliciting people on 2 levels. One is to achieve the goal of this program is to call for someone's resignation, legitimately, spontaneously, someone who would be motivated to use this forum to call for someone's resignation. So that's what turns this thing into a silly exercise, from a silly exercise to something that could be meaningful. Again, the masses speaking to the elites of government and business. And the second thing I'm soliciting is just someone to participate. Like, it'd be great if I could take a break and I had another voice on this thing who could fill. But until then, it's just me. Like right now, I'd like to set this down, set the book down, and maybe put on my warmer clothes. So this reading idea is kind of dumb. It's actually a good idea if I had Noam Chomsky and I had pages that were like printed to hold and read easily. So I think I'll just hang out on the corner. I'll check my battery and clock every now and then, and I'll try to at least go a half an hour. Yeah, 20. I've gone 15 minutes. I'm halfway there. I didn't check my battery. The battery on the laptop is holding out, and I've got the battery on my cell phone charging. So this is cool. So the reading thing could work great. If I had, again, I'm soliciting people, listeners, I'm soliciting people on two levels. One is for someone to get inspired by this forum, someone to get angry about someone's in power, either in corporate, in business, or in government, and use this forum as a platform to call for person's resignation. Again, resign now. It'd be great if I had other people doing this and we linked them together and we had multiple voices on this. So again, I'm soliciting people on two levels, to two different areas. One is core of this, the foundation of this would allow it to turn from a silly exercise into something meaningful. That's someone to call for a resignation. That's a solicitation of participation that I'd like. That's the content, the quality of the participation. The other soliciting I'm doing is for just to participate, just a second voice, just someone to talk to, and fill some of the time. Again, I'm trying to make this long as I can, up to an hour. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm not going to do that tonight, but I will try to on another night. I'll wear warmer shoes, and I'll put my warmer clothing on to start. So this is a recent idea I had called Resign Now. Listeners, I've written something. I've got a fairly recent, in the last week, a blog post called Resign Now, # Resign Now. And it explains what I will say now is that I'm trying to create a forum where people call for the resignation of someone in power, either a business leader or a government leader. The resignations of people in power come relatively easily. When someone gets signaled out for resignation, I can't say this happens with all of them, but they suddenly have the sense that they have no friends, they have no allies. The people who are in power with them, this could be a dead man walking, or woman, dead man walking, or dead woman walking, and now others will distance themselves, himself and herself, from the person who is being challenged, being called to resign. So this isolating the person, of course, makes them more vulnerable when the same social systems, corporate hierarchy that push them up begins to malfunction, begins to break down. Suddenly that person loses power, becomes isolated, and the resignation can come relatively easy. It happened in a few days this week with the West Virginian mayor who insulted the First Lady. So I think it's important. I think people in power should behave responsibly. And when they don't, I think they should be challenged. And one of the best ways today with social media is to challenge them to step down. In addition to reaching people on top, I would also like to target gypsy cops and pedophile priests. Now, these people are not high level. These people are low level. However, they are known cops. Gypsy cops are the ones who, have alcoholism that causes a negative effect in their job performance, so they get fired. And they go to a neighboring community, and now they work in that community. And then they go from one to another, and for some reason, hey, Hector, for some reason, they're able to get away with this. I've read that it's quite common that these people will continue to let their problems cause poor job performance, and yet they continue to get jobs in other areas, other locations, other communities. So that's a gypsy cop, and I'd like to see someone take an interest in one of these cops and follow him or her to the new location. I don't mean physically, but find where the person goes after he or she gets fired. And when you find out the person gets reemployed, call for that person's resignation. I think if the person is a series of failings in job performance, then the person should be a janitor. And with alcohol, I mean, you can't be a good janitor. With alcoholism being a severe problem in someone's life, you can't really do any job good. But at least you can do less damage with a broom than you can with a gun. So the pedophile priests follow the same pattern. These priests have been known to go from assignment to assignment, brought to justice. And so I'd like to go for them also. But again, this forum is something I'm trying to create that it's going to be one of two things. It's going to be me alone trying to solicit people, and I run out of determination prior to get any participation. You know, it dies under its own weight. And the second thing that will happen is it becomes successful, and maybe even really successful, and it's at that point where I lose control of it, and it sort of gets its own wings. So I'm very aware of that this concept I have could morph, and I will roll with that as it happens. It would be a nice problem to have. In other words, the idea that I'm losing control of this because it becomes popular, that's a problem. Ends up threatening my original idea. It becomes nothing, and then it dies under a concept when it might have survived under the original one. Who knows? But the point is there is part of my idea that could go into a different direction. But again, my original idea is to call for the resignation of the elite of business and government. And as much as I think it's exciting for this to go international, I don't think that's, I don't know. That's not my first choice. But who knows? I've got friends in India, and next thing you know, we'll be calling for the resignation of someone in India, which I guess would be fun. But my intention, my thoughts are American. We'll see. Again, I tend to do this weekly. I'm soliciting for people to participate in one of two ways, either to just get on this thing and ease some of the burden that I have to fill time, trying to make this thing last an hour. It is appearing that my tech is going to cooperate. My cell phone went from 68% to almost zero very quickly, but I got my backup battery, and even in the cold weather, it seems to be holding up on my laptop. It is going to hold for another 10 minutes, which is all I need it to do. Yeah, I'm 38. I'm 23 minutes into this. So if I get 30, 30 is the time of a typical TV show. And if I can do this for 30 minutes, and I'll be better prepared the next time. And I should be able to go for a half hour. I had this idea I'd go for an hour, but I don't think I can do it. I certainly can't do it tonight. If I got other participation, then I could do it. Resign Now is the name of this program, launching tonight. This is I don't even know what to call it. It's a recruiting format that will naturally convert to the real program if I'm ever able to get the participation I'm seeking. The participation would be just people to participate, get in and talk about this, or B, someone pissed off who wants to make a case for someone's resignation. Again, Resign Now, the concept is that people would call for a specific resignation of a specific person for an event or a series of events that he or she has misused the power that has been trusted to him or her. So I would get someone on this program who would participate, and this, of course, could be anonymous. This could be in text. And then I would read it, and maybe someone would get inspired to tweet about it. Then next thing you know, we got a hashtag with Resign Now plus the person's name. I wish I knew the West Virginia mayor's name. I don't. So it would be Resign Now, West Virginia mayor. And maybe this program could be successful enough to take one person's idea and make it into a bigger audience, and then maybe it would catch some wind on Twitter, and it would go from there. And if people know that there's a call for resignation, and that call is for good reason, and they can rally behind it, and someone resigns, this becomes the masses speaking to the elite. And I really see little harm in this. I mean, John Stumped, I forgive me if I've got his name wrong, but the recently resigned CEO of Wells Fargo. I'd like to add the word disgraced with that. However, it's not based in the way of Anthony Weiner. It's embarrassed, I think, because he really looked like a fool when he testified to the Senate at the hands of Elizabeth Warren. She was brilliant. And Stumped resigned. It's no harm. Stumped is a banker that suddenly loses his job. This is not lynching. Now, the concept of a mass, a mob working outside the justice system to demand action and getting that action without an organized process of justice, that is elements of lynching. However, John Stumped basically got lynched, but he just loses his job. He still has a ton of money. There's no harm. But without question, he lost face. Without question, the people that kissed his ass as a president, as a CEO of this bank, one of the nation's largest, suddenly didn't find John so great anymore. And that is a fall that people want to avoid. And whether John falls into the abyss of hunger and homelessness, or just a cozy landing pad, the truth is, if the lynch mob gets him to resign, and it wasn't really fair, so you have a revolving door at the top, and now you have one that takes his place because he up in an unjustified for bank and get another job, or just retire on the pile of money that you have. So there really isn't even if the process of calling for resignation ends up being unfair. It's my intention that it's fair. Much of this will be out of my control if this program's successful. However, it ends up being unfair. It really isn't a horrible thing. Even people go out and vandalize his car or threaten his family. They call for his resignation. Fair case, puts his resume together and say, hey, listen, this is what really happened. And I ended up being victim of a lynch mob, so I resigned to get my name out of the headlines because it was only negative. The call for my resignation was so strong that I had to resign. I did resign, but it wasn't justified. The guy could get his career back on track if that's the case. So I don't really care. This thing ends up calling for the resignation of its son. It's not my first choice. I'd like it to be call for resignation for good reasons. But if it does get out of control and it ends up being a lynch mob, and as long as it remains, physical, no physical threat, no threat of violence, no threats of the family or anyone else, but it just is a public outcry for someone's resignation, where literally masses of people are getting educated in a matter of days on who someone is and what he or she has done to mishandle the power that they've been trusted with. Dominic Strauss-Kahn is a classic example. That guy needed to resign, and it took too long. He was worried about his legal troubles. He managed to keep himself out of jail, and he eventually resigned. Dominic Strauss-Kahn, nobody in New York knew who he was. Nobody in terms of, I didn't know who he was, and other than people in banking. A very small percentage of New Yorkers knew who he was. Suddenly, this guy is in our papers every single day. And eventually he resigned. I'd like to see that process accelerated a little bit. Certainly the IMF and the world finance suffered some loss. Why its leader was resistant to resigning. The IMF has not Strauss-Kahn. And his resignation, that was certainly justified. I've already done a half hour. Okay, I feel accomplished. If anyone's made it to this point, I just, or if anyone's listening at this point, maybe a fast forward, maybe you caught me in the live the live feed. Whatever the case, if you're listening to me now, a review of this thing. I am creating a forum. I am attempting to create a forum called Resign Now. This is it. I create this 30-minute window for people to participate in one of two ways. To just get on and talk to me so I don't have to be the only voice. Give me some company and support on this thing. And then the real goal is to get someone who has some facts, has done some research, are willing to ask for help to get some research done for someone that should resign. Again, my first target is the elite of business and government. And I'd love to see it. The people need to be heard. And resignation seems to be relatively easy. That is certainly not easy, but relatively easy compared to our democratization periods that Noam Chomsky writes about. Civil rights movement, untold death, murder, ultimately with Martin Luther King's in 1968. But that wasn't the only one. There were people who were not famous, who were murdered, who were not targeted murders the way he was. They just got killed in the process. And they weren't all black people, though certainly most of them were. So, so with the death, the destruction, the vandalism, the just the turmoil of a social movement is huge. And what's happening? The people are screaming. The people are calling for change. The bottom of the society is calling to the top. Well, here's a way to do it that might not be so painful, might not be so hard. And let's do this. Aren't you cold? So this guy, his name's Jamal. I should get him on this program because he doesn't seem to be bothered by the cold. So that's it. Resign now. I'm going to attempt to do this. Now that I have this video as an example, I'm going to ping it to people like Brad, who was a ping into this program. And I didn't attempt to bring him online, but I will, along with other people. And maybe in time, I'll at least get some listeners that I know are out there. And so that feels, I need to kind of get fed a little bit to keep going on this. So right now I'm just doing it on a personal, but I think it has some determination to carry it forward, trying to fill out this commitment of 30 minutes once a week. And so even if I had someone online who I knew was listening, I could look at my screen right now and I could say, oh yeah, Brad's there. That would be great, even if they weren't talking. It could even have them muted. But having another voice would also help, just to participate, someone else to say, okay, the concept, I get it. I don't know if we can accomplish it either, but let's try it. Make a commitment 30 minutes a week, and that's where I'm trying to go. So again, resign now, soliciting participants just to participate. Either just listen and let me know you're there. That'll give me some support to keep up my commitment to do this 30 minutes once a week for some period of time, maybe through the winter. And secondly, who would be angry about the misuse of power, the elite in business or government, and would come on this program and call for someone's resignation. We'll see where it goes. This has been Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty in a Google search for my site. Thank you for listening. Restful. Ciao.